Asterisk, owning land at the edge of a suburban neighborhood has always been a balancing act. On one side, I had the peace and freedom of open acreage. Fields stretching far enough that the sunsets looked like they belonged to another century. On the other, I was just close enough to the developments, with their cul-de-sacs and manicured lawns, that the people who lived there sometimes forgot boundaries existed. Most neighbors were respectful, but there was one exception, the woman everyone whispered about as the HOA Karen. She wasn't just a stickler for rules on her own block. She was convinced she had authority everywhere, including my land, which had never been part of her HOA and never would be. Karen had a talent for inserting herself into situations that weren't hers. If you painted your house a shade she didn't like, she complained. If kids played basketball past 7 p.m., she called it a disruption to community peace. And if someone parked a truck on the street overnight, she treated it like a federal offense. I had dealt with her in passing before her long lectures about how my cows smelled when the wind shifted, or how my fence line ruined the view from her jogging route, but I never imagined she'd cross the line the way she did that summer. It began with whispers around town, small hints that she was planning something big for the neighborhood. Flyers started popping up on social media and even tucked into mailboxes. Community mega campout, a weekend of fun, family, and togetherness. All are welcome. At first, I skimmed past it, assuming she had reserved the local park. After all, that's where neighborhood events usually happened. But then one of my friends sent me a screenshot of the post where Karen bragged, "We're so lucky to have this huge private field available for our use. It'll be perfect for tents, games, and barbecues." Beneath the post was a photo I recognized instantly. It was my land. I nearly dropped my phone. My land wasn't for rent, wasn't for public use, and definitely wasn't for 1,000 people to trample through. I raised livestock there. The grass wasn't decorative. It was feed. The fences weren't optional barriers. There were protections for both the animals and anyone who wandered too close. Yet here was Karen broadcasting to hundreds of families that she had secured it for a weekend-long event, as if she held the deed herself. When I confronted her, I tried to keep calm. I caught her outside her house while she was pruning roses in her front yard. Wearing her wide-brimmed sun hat and that permanent smirk, she seemed to save just for me. "Karen," I started, I saw your post about the campout. That land isn't available. It's private property, and I need you to take down the announcement." She didn't even flinch. "Oh, don't be difficult," she said, waving her pruning shears like she was dismissing a child. "The community needs events like this. You've got all that space, and you don't even use it for anything fun. Think of this as your contribution." "My contribution," I repeated, incredulous. "I didn't agree to this. That's my pasture. My cattle graze there. People could get hurt." Karen rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might fall over. "Honestly, you're being dramatic. No one's going to bother your cows. They'll stay on their side, and everyone will clean up when they're done. It's just one weekend. You should be grateful people will finally get to enjoy that land instead of watching it sit there." I felt my jaw tighten. She was talking about acres I'd worked hard to maintain, land that my family had invested sweat and money into, as if it were a vacant lot she could borrow. Her tone wasn't asking, it was declaring. She had already made up her mind, and my objections didn't factor into her equation. Word spread faster than wildfire after that. I drove past my property one afternoon to check the fences, and sure enough, strangers were already walking the perimeter, pointing at spots where they planned to pitch tents. A few had even spray-painted little markers in the grass, like they were reserving campsites. Trucks hauled in coolers, kids rode bikes across my pasture, and one family even dragged in a portable fire pit. The more I watched, the more I realized Karen hadn't just invited a handful of neighbors, she had invited everyone. At least 1,000 people were planning to show up, and judging by the caravans already arriving, half of them had decided to come early. The sight was infuriating. My carefully mended fences were being treated like obstacles in their playground. Trash already littered the edges of the field, soda cans glinting in the sun, and the noise music blasting from portable speakers. People shouting directions across the field, owed through the valley like a carnival. I stood at the fence line, fists clenched, Watching years of careful stewardship unravel in hours, I called Karen again, this time more forcefully. "You need to get these people off my land right now," I demanded. "This isn't a park. You didn't ask permission. You can't just invite the whole county to camp on private property." Her response was infuriatingly smug. "You're overreacting. Everyone's having a good time, and no one's getting hurt. You should stop being so selfish and learn to share. Besides, if you tried to stop it now, you'd look like the bad guy." That was her trump card: social pressure. She thrived on it, wielding public opinion like a weapon. She knew that if I forced people off, she could spin the story into the grumpy landowner ruining everyone's fun, and maybe some people would believe her. But I wasn't about to stand by while strangers trampled my property, spooked my livestock, and ignored every boundary I'd put in place. The worst part was the way Karen strutted around the field, clipboard in hand like she was the director of some grand festival. She pointed out where the family zone should go, where the music stage could be set up, and even where food trucks might park. Food trucks, as if this were a county fair instead of my grazing pasture. Her voice carried across the field, bossy and confident, and I could see the campers nodding along, treating her word like law, watching it all unfold. I realized this wasn't just about entitlement. It was about control. Karen wasn't satisfied running her HOA meetings or dictating the color of mailboxes. She wanted to prove she could commandeer land that didn't belong to her and bend 1,000 people to her vision. And the worst part was, for the moment, it was working. But deep down, I knew something Karen didn't. My land wasn't just empty fields waiting for picnics and tents. It was alive with animals who had as much claim to it as I did, and they weren't going to tolerate this invasion quietly. While Karen reveled in her borrowed authority, I started planning how to remind her and everyone else just whose land they were standing on. By Saturday morning, my land looked like a county fairground. What had started as a trickle of campers had become a full-blown flood. Rows of brightly colored tents dotted the pasture like mismatched mushrooms after a storm. Pickup trucks and SUVs were parked haphazardly along my fence line, some so close, their tires bent the wire. Smoke from portable grills curled into the sky, mixing with the blaring thump of portable speakers. People laughed, hollered, and played games, all while trampling the grass my cattle depended on. The scene might have looked festive to an outsider, but to me, it was chaos, the kind of chaos that eats away at order and ownership one. Footprint at a time. I hadn't slept the night before. I paced my porch, staring at the glow of lanterns across my property, listening to the noise echo into the night. Every hour I thought of calling the sheriff, but the town was small, and I knew how that would play out. They'd send a deputy, who'd take one look at 1,000 campers and shrug. Civil dispute, they'd call it. Maybe they'd suggest I work it out with Karen. The idea of relying on officials to fix the mess she had made felt useless. This was my land, my responsibility, my fight. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. If Karen wanted to treat my pasture like a campground, then she and her guests were going to meet its real residents. I pulled on my boots, walked out to the barn, and slid the heavy latch on the corral gate. Inside, my bulls shifted, their massive bodies restless, snorting clouds of steam into the cool morning air. They were powerful, stubborn creatures, territorial to their core. Unlike Karen's campers, they didn't take kindly to strangers occupying their feeding ground. I rested my hand on the gate for a long moment, listening to their weighty movements. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about reminding everyone that my land wasn't theirs to claim. As the sun crept higher, the camp buzzed with activity. Kids rode bikes dangerously close to the livestock fence, while groups of adults set up volleyball nets and folding tables. Karen herself paraded through the crowd with her clipboard, barking instructions like a general marshaling troops. She wore a broad grin, oblivious to or perhaps deliberately ignoring the fact that her empire rested on stolen ground. Every time I caught a glimpse of her, that smug expression fanned the flames of my resolve. Finally, I unlatched the gate. The iron hinges groaned, and the bulls pushed forward as if they'd been waiting for this moment. Their hooves thundered against the dirt, each step carrying the promise of dominance. They lumbered into the open field, tossing their heads, horns gleaming in the morning light. For a few precious seconds, the campers didn't notice. They kept laughing, grilling, playing music. But then one of the bulls let out a deep, guttural bellow that rolled across the field like a warning drum. The reaction was instant. Heads snapped toward the sound. A child screamed. An adult dropped a plate of food. And then the first wave of panic surged through the crowd as people realized what was happening. Massive. Muscular animals were marching straight toward the heart of their party. The bulls weren't charging yet, they were curious, cautious but to the untrained eye. They looked like an unstoppable wall of muscle and horn. Chaos erupted. Campers abandoned tents and coolers in their scramble to flee. Lawn chairs toppled, volleyball nets collapsed, and speakers were kicked over in the rush. Some tried to gather their belongings, fumbling with tent poles and zippers. But the bulls' slow, deliberate advance made it clear they had no time. The animals snorted, pawed the ground, and tossed their heads, asserting dominance with every step. One man shouted, "Stay calm, they won't hurt us." But the stampede of people fleeing in all directions drowned him out. Mothers scooped up children. Fathers dragged coolers behind them. Teenagers shrieked as they sprinted toward the neighborhood. The sight would have been comical if it weren't so satisfying. The community campout dissolving into a full-blown exodus, driven not by my words or threats but by nature itself. Karen, however, was not so quick to flee. She stood in the middle of the field, flapping her clipboard like a shield, shouting commands no one listened to. "Don't run. Stay where you are. They won't hurt you." Her voice cracked with desperation, but the campers ignored her, scattering like leaves in the wind. For all her confidence, Karen was powerless against the primal fear those bulls inspired. Her authority evaporated the moment people realized she couldn't control the very land she'd claimed to command. The bulls, sensing the panic, grew bolder. One nudged a cooler with his horns, sending sodas rolling across the grass. Another stomped through a half-collapsed tent, shredding fabric beneath his hooves. They weren't attacking, they were reclaiming, but the message was clear. This was their territory. The more they moved, the faster the campers ran. Until the once bustling field looked like a battlefield littered with abandoned gear. I leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with grim satisfaction. For hours I had begged for respect, for acknowledgement of my rights. Karen hadn't listened. Now the land itself had spoken through its true inhabitants, and the result was undeniable. One by one, vehicles screeched away from the property, tires spitting gravel as drivers fled. The air, once filled with music and laughter, now rang with the sound of panicked voices fading into the distance. At last, only Karen remained. Her clipboard dangled at her side, her face red with fury and humiliation. She stomped toward me, her heels sinking into the soft earth with each step. "This is outrageous," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You've ruined everything. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? I'm going to report you. I'll have the HOA file a complaint. I'll call the sheriffs. Someone will make you pay for this." I met her glare calmly, gesturing toward the bold black letters on the sign beside me. "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." "I didn't ruin anything," I said evenly. "You did. You brought people onto land that wasn't yours without permission. They ignored the signs, ignored my warnings, and now they've had a taste of what happens when you treat private property like a playground. My bulls belong here." "Your campers didn't?" Karen sputtered, her face contorting with rage, but the words she wanted wouldn't come. For once, she had no audience, no crowd to back her up. Her empire of borrowed power had scattered, leaving her alone in the mess she had made. The bulls grazed peacefully behind me now, their job done, their dominance established. They didn't need to understand the drama. They only knew the land was theirs again. Eventually, Karen turned and stormed off, muttering threats under her breath. But I knew the truth. She'd been defeated not by me, but by the undeniable reality of boundaries she could never control. My land wasn't a stage for her ego. It never would be. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I walked the field, surveying the wreckage, abandoned tents, broken chairs, scattered trash. It would take days to clean up, but for the first time all weekend, I felt peace. the grass would grow back. The fences could be mended, but the lesson Karen had learned, and the story the campers would tell, would last far longer. They would remember the bulls, the bellow that sent them running, and the land that refused to be stolen.